We are back, human beings, and for the first time in a very, very long time, this is going to be the board room. This is part of the GMS Magazine podcast, and this is a podcast all about role playing games, board games, and the people who make them, sometimes the people who play them. And I am, as usual, Paco Garcia. And you're muted.
I swear I'll get this. This is Chris from DSX Machina.
And just so you know, humans, Chris has got a cold and he's sneezing quite violently at times, as the splashes on his screen can testify for.
Oh.
No, that's not true. So sometimes the volume goes off, so we are not regaled with his harmonious sneezing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
hopefully, like I said, hopefully it's not anything too bad. I
no.
think I'm through the worst of it. I'm in the coughing sneezing phase right now, so hopefully it should be done soon.
Also, just so you know, and I haven't told you this before, Chris, but tonight I had for dinner something called esgarraet. Okay.
Okay.
A friend of mine, came around and he brought some, and it was absolutely delicious. But esgarraet is something made with desalted cod. We buy cod salted because it preserves a lot better, but you shouldn't eat an awful lot of that because
Right.
of whatever. Anyway,
I
um,
am Portuguese.
so we had that, and it's made with roasted peppers and desalted cod and olive oil and salt and a couple of other ingredients that you put in there and garlic. Lots of it. So if right now you can smell garlic, it's because of me. It's coming into the microphone.
Yeah,
And
problem is I love garlic, so I didn't know whether or not this because we have the smell-o-vision going. So
exactly. So I apologize if you don't like garlic, but
oh,
that's
I
that's
love
that's
garlic.
what you can smell right now. I'm
I
sorry.
love garlic.
Me too. I,
Oh,
I I just could
I love garlic.
wear it as a perfume.
Oh my god.
So anyway,
Love garlic and I love black pepper. Like I said,
mm,
it's
I love chili peppers. I love
mm,
spicy food so
I
much. Mm.
for me, you know what? I realized I've been denying my love of black pepper for far too
No,
long. I love black pepper.
that's not fair. So anyway, today we also have some more news. One news that is pertinent to us, and is that you human beings are going to see some changes in the way that Chris and I are recording our podcasts. Because instead of recording 1 hour long podcast or 1 hour and a bit, we are going to record shorter podcasts, and the audio podcast is going to be centralized through Anchor, which is also Spotify. I'm sorry if that offends you, but it's kind of free and it gives you good service. And I cannot really afford to pay another $300 that Podbean was costing me. So those are going to go there. But the reviews are going to be divided between our channels. So sometimes they will go in my channel, sometimes they will go in Chris's channel, and they will go on to the Board Game Geek whenever, as and when, so we can basically help each other grow a little bit more. So please keep joining us because I think this is going to work out, and this is going to be a really cool formula. What do you think, Mr. Chris?
Yes, thank you. Look.
I don't know. Yes, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I
Oh.
thought you actually had said thank, and it said thanks to Chris. I'm thinking, okay, sure. I don't think I take credit for all that, but okay.
Well, no, it was partly your idea, and I used to do this before, a long, long time ago, when I was recording the podcast on my own, and I was a very lonely and kind of sad creature who didn't have a podcasting friend. Even though I've had some podcasting friends in the past, and they turned up to be, you know, kind of assholes. Um, so you're safe for now. Just don't turn into an asshole, please.
I was it's interesting. I finished my novel a couple weeks ago, and I did my edit, and I decided I wanted to go through the two previous novels before I go to print,
Mm.
just to catch. And I was just like, hey, this isn't so bad. But I noticed my writing style has changed considerably. I was way more descriptive before, and now I'm a lot more dialogue based. And this was something a change that I adopted through Affinity. So I would write the way I read with some of the ADHD. I skip a lot of the narrative stuff, and going through the book now, like the first book now, I'm like, yeah, I do a lot of narrative stuff because I was trying to feel like, oh, this is what I have to write like. And then I got to Affinity. I was saying, like, no, what, I'm going to write it the way I read, and this is much more dialogue based, a bit looser, a bit more Spartan in the descriptive dialogue. But going through the first book, I would uncover some of the gender dialogue and gender terminology, and I'm like, wow, it's amazing how programmed I was to write in a certain fashion and automatically kind of assume certain things. And I thought that was interesting that uh, because the third book introduces a non-binary character,
Okay.
um, and I also defined one character as being gay, and some people are going to be like, "Well, this character wasn't gay before," and I'm like, well, "No, they were in an adventure fighting fighting dragons and so forth. There was never a point for it to pop up in conversation." And I had already made a decision that this character was gay actually some time ago, but I'm like, how am I going to create a scenario where this pops up? And then there wasn't any until book three. And book three, I'm just like, well, this is going to be the position. Now, the interesting thing, and I hate to say this is pure coincidence, but my game,
Hmm.
the novel was based on the RPG. So I have an RPG called Amethyst and a novel called Amethyst, and both of them are based on this original campaign I ran 20 years ago. God, I'm old. Started off in around 2000, and I thought as more time passed, actually, no, I didn't. I realized as more time passed that I was deviating from the events of this original campaign. A lot of the original players other players are still represented. Their character names are still represented, whether or not that's a good idea or not. And I thought, well, this is going to go off on a tangent from the original events. But I found out when I was writing the third book that I kept on returning back to some of the ideas that I presented, and one of them was the introduction of a bard. And I decided I'm going to make this bard very very different than what most people would expect a bard character would be back in 2000 D&D. So I decided, I'm going to make this character non-binary, and I'm going to make this character um, uh, like visually inspired by a character on Star Trek Discovery,
Hmm.
who's also non-binary. I really like this actor. They're really quite talented, and I thought this is going to be the person I'm going to picture. And then I went to our friend Matthew McCack and said, I need you to give me a name. And so Matthew gave me a name. I was going to name the character Matthew as a tribute, but I was like, no, yeah, name the character this. Okay. The character's called Ren, Wren. And there's a comment where the character of Ren was refusing to say what their name was, and so they all started making up names. We're just going to make up a name, and so they all start sending out, like, we're going to call you Chris, and they're and they and both characters started, and on the other character started just thinking up names, because like, you're not going to tell us your name, we're going to make up names. And so they all start making up names, but all the names they're making up are all gender neutral names, because just by default they don't, they're just, so they're like, oh, your name is Skylar or Chris. It's all these, like, and so forth. And so, like, it's Ren, just leave me alone. Now the pure coincidence is that this character of Ren, was a bard in my original game. uh, and this is the character, it was just pure coincidence that this character, this player, did this. But I forgot that this player also came out as non-binary. Actually, no, they came out as trans. They switched genders. I do believe he's a she now. And so it's just pure coincidence that I've decided that and I haven't reached out to that player say, oh, by the way, your character is in this story, but it's not really that character because I didn't use your name or your description. And just by as an irony, or coincidence, that just the character is non-binary now.
I'm sure they'd
But
love to
going,
know that.
yeah, I don't think we've spoken, but I'll reach out. All the other thing is that the musical instrument isn't a lyre or a guitar. I picked a hurdy-gurdy, a very, you couldn't have a more unusual instrument, but it does transform into a gun. So I wanted to make something a little different. But like I said, going through that first book, I was like spotting the kind of that gender dialogue, and I go, oh yeah, you know what? It's going back in it, it's one of those situations where it's like, yeah, no, I think I'm a better writer now. I don't have to follow these kind of patterns. So it's one of those situations you're like, what you say is like, yeah, I'm not an asshole, but I always remember when I was. I remember when I was a teenager, and I'm like, oh boy, I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad there was no social media back when I was a teenager.
Oh
I'll
my
tell you
god,
that.
I would have been arrested so many times, seriously, just for being obnoxious and a little shit. So yeah, I'm really pleased that I am no longer that person. My god, oh, we're an awful human being. Anyway, we have some a few things to talk about, and today, human beings, we're gonna talk about just a couple of topics to make this a bit quicker. And the first one, a bit of a continuation of something that we discussed last week, because soon after we released the podcast, it was pretty much about the same time.
Yeah, like a day
Um,
later.
yeah, last week we spoke about Evil Genius Games and how it seemed to be going down like a lead balloon. And a couple of days went by since the whole thing began, and this super duper bizarre um, kind of communique from them came out about AI and how they weren't going to use it. And then ENWorld produced an article that was a little bit on the when I was reading it. It was quite informative, but it was also a bit like, do you need to tell me the same thing three times, four times? Oh, five times already? You repeat yourself an awful lot. And although they didn't, Morris didn't cite any sources, he mentioned that there were an awful lot of them, which was a
Yeah, I
bit.
remember about a week earlier, he went on Facebook asking um, for people who want to talk about it to reach out to him, and obviously some people had.
Yeah, but I understand the need for discretion
Mm.
when it's about these things. So I don't expect people to come out on full to discuss and disclose what is it that has happened. Um, however, I do expect is for journalists to be as thorough and precise as possible. And my feelings about the article, even though it was very useful, because it did one thing very well and it gave a fairly comprehensive chronology. So we know when some things happened and we know who is behind Evil Genius Games.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, somebody who wishes to remain anonymous has given us some damning information that we really cannot tell you about, but is dreadful, is not a line of argument either.
yeah. Unfortunately, this is always an issue when you're dealing with journalism is the citing of sources and so forth. And if it's something like Reuters, um, uh, like a respect source, if they are talking about their sources, you know that they have done the due diligence and they have vetted their sources. I don't know whether or not ENWorld has reached that crescendo of
Um,
journalistic integrity. Now,
well,
that being said, you and I, at least I've talked with a large number of people associated with this. So, and as someone who's been in this industry for a while, I think you and I can both look at and go, well, this is pretty easy to believe.
it is. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Moro has invented anything. I'm not saying that the people who have spoken with them are lying at all. But what I'm saying is that as a piece of journalism, it has no axiopisty for me. It just doesn't have what it takes for me to trust that piece. When journalists don't disclose their sources, at the very least, what they can disclose is some data that can be verified one way or another. And if
Yeah,
you cannot
yeah.
disclose data that can be verified, you have to leave that thing out because You could just be inventing it. You could just be letting yourself be dragged by the bias and invent it. It's just not credible. I'm sorry, it's just not credible. So I am very prepared to believe, because I have seen friends of mine in Facebook who have come out citing ethical concerns, but I don't know what those ethical concerns are. So I believe them. So I believe that Evil Genius Game has gone through some red, has crossed some red lines in ethical and ethics, but I don't know what they've done.
Well, for me, looking at it, I do know that the day after, like I said, we don't know who spoke, but I do know that one person who was one of the major people who did step away was hit with a cease and desist, even though they have not posted anything. They were hit by a cease and desist letter to try to get them to shut up. And I think it was just like one of those situations like, well, this person hasn't said anything. So why are you hitting that angle and so forth? Like why would you send a cease and desist for someone who hasn't revealed anything unless there's something that you're worried that they have spoken. Um, I do know that has happened, and when it comes to like the one that really hit me going into the details, there are two things that I took away from it. The first was the topic about them not having enough money. And uh, when the report came down and said people weren't being paid and hadn't been paid, I said, you know, we can look at the toxic environment and the reports of a toxic environment. As someone who has been in environments similar to this, um, I can say on my situation, but I can say with a good gut that it ultimately came down to money.
Mhm.
I think it ultimately came down to you'd be surprised what people are willing to put up with if they're paid very well. And the moment they're not paying paid very well, and we said this exact same thing a week ago, that it's amazing what people will accept if they're being paid very well. And the moment they're not, you better watch out because every single thing that you've done that they don't like is going to come out, and that's what's happened. And I think the fact that they had to the tune of $1 million in tech bro investments, and then another $1 million raised on Kickstarter, um, shows you that and people realize how little money is in tabletop role playing. And when you have a staff of 20 people, you'd be surprised how quickly, and when you're dealing with what they're spending on, with their advertising, the Gen Con, the posters, they have the free caps, how much that money could vaporize. And I was saying the fact that $1 million Kickstarter, if you had a Kickstarter raise of $500,000, you probably spent $60,000 to $70,000 on advertising. And I saw that campaign everywhere. It was everywhere on Facebook. So they spent a lot of money, and then you have to pay these people a decent wage for them to live,
Mhm.
and then like ignoring the whole they were on contracts. We have to give them, and we talked about that at length. But when you have a staff of 20, you'd be surprised how quickly that type of money can vaporize, especially when you're dealing with six franchises, six IPs, so you have to pay for. Um, so when I heard that they had run out of money, it was not I wasn't at all surprised. We're not as well surprised because we were basically saying that it's chances are it was a money issue. The other thing that concerned me was, and this is something that um, I I don't say it triggered me, but it definitely resonated. There was a line that kept on popping up in the forums when somebody said, "You need to whore yourself out," and it's a term that I have heard ad nauseum in my various professions
Mhm.
for a very very long time. And when I heard it, I was just like, "Have I said that?" Yeah, yeah, no, I've said that more or less to me. I've never said that to someone of a woman. I didn't say that to a woman. I didn't say that to somebody, uh, but I know that it's been told to me. But it's just like, yeah, that term is so inappropriate. You never really consider how inappropriate that line is. But when I heard the number of times that we people were locking down on that line, I'm like, oh boy, it's so you have to be really really careful what you say now. And for me, as I've often said, I worked in retail for 30 years, and you cannot say stuff like that.
Mhm.
And my wife comes out of working in car shops, and they say stuff like this all the time. This really quite sexist, very toxic environment, and she kind of passes it off, saying, "Oh, and that's just how people talk." And I'm like, it's really not good.
Yeah, no.
Um, but for me, like I said, it's we're dealing with a semi dealing with the toxic atmosphere. But I think at the end of the day, it just came down to money.
It's probably. I mean, the fall definitely came because of money. I'm convinced of that. I mean, I'm just imagining it. So this is. I don't have any evidence of this happening, so don't at me. But my impression is I definitely came out of not having enough money and spending the money where they shouldn't have. They are still trying to survive, though, to the point that they had Luke Gygax advertising, that they are going to be doing games at GaryCon.
Yeah, I brought that up to you, and I was just like,
Yes,
and you said that, I mean, you made a interesting point, but it felt for me it just kind of a little tone deaf. You think that they would be like stepping back to let the controversy pass? Um,
well, the thing is, there are two things I have to say about that.
mm,
Firstly, having met Luke, I bet you anything that he's genuinely trying to help. Okay, I have no reason whatsoever to believe that he is in any way, shape, or form involved or close to the company other than I know people inside and I want to help them.
yeah,
No
it
reason.
still has 6 employees. I think they're 20 down to 6.
Exactly. And those people need to eat. So I can
Yeah,
understand those people doing their best to make the company survive because they're getting paid, perhaps, hopefully, let's hope so, because they love it, because maybe they don't have anything else yet. They don't have other means to make a living.
yeah. 'Cause if you're still employed by that company and you're not being paid, I'm like, you saw the writing on the wall. Like,
Yeah, but I can understand people. I mean, to be honest, maybe they didn't have enough to pay 20 people, but maybe they have enough to pay six. I want to believe that. I want to believe that, the people remaining there are getting paid. And if they aren't, and if you listen or you know anybody who works in that company is not getting paid, please tell them to leave. Please, because any second that anyone spends in a company that's not paying them is a second that they are not using finding a job that will.
yeah,
So just get out and work there as a hobby, just a few hours or whatever. Please, please, please get out. But the point is that they are still trying to survive. They're still trying to sell the games. They're not really letting themselves sink to the bottom. And, to some degree, I kind of appreciate that.
I'm trying to figure out though what I was very annoyed at a couple of things because people like when the article went live, it was everywhere.
Hmm.
I mean, not a single. I mean, every single person I know in the tabletop industry was talking about it. It positively hit the. It hit everywhere, and people ended up talking about their opinions on it. And I'll bring up one of the things I found in a second. But the one thing that bothered me personally was the number of people that were saying, "Oh, damn, they were the only non-fantasy team in town," and I'm like,
What?
what are you talking? And it just shows you, and as people were saying, it just shows you the number of I would say people who are just ignorant. They don't bother looking around because yeah, sure, you could have a grassroots advertising campaign, but that doesn't beat just cold hard cash to promote your product. And so a lot of people did not believe that there was any other non-fantasy stuff on the market for 5e. And I'm like, my product came out 4 years before theirs. I've had, my products have outsold theirs on Drive Through RPG. You have Hyperlanes, you have Vesper Genesis, you have Gene Funk. All of us have predated Everyday Heroes. but because they were giving out free caps at Gen Con, now everyone thinks they're the only player in town. I'm just like, that's an insult to a lot of really, really good creators out there that have been developing these wonderfully innovative systems. Not just not to my own horn, but these other people out there that have worked on this, and it's just very frustrating to have people think that, oh great, now we're not going to have any non-fantasy stuff out there. I'm like, dude, they've been out longer and they will exist long after this company is folded.
I think I have, for people who thought that, I have, on people who think ab- that about any other company, oh, there's no one that's doing this. I have a bit of a spoiler. There is not one single company, and if you believe there is, I would love you to point at them. I don't believe there is a single company in the whole world of role playing games in the whole world that does something that nobody else does.
Mm. Oh yeah.
I don't believe it. I don't believe that there is a company out there that does a genre or a topic or a theme that nobody else is covering. It's just, it doesn't exist. There
Oh
are
yeah.
plenty of companies doing pretty much anything. Superheroes, there are plenty. Horror, there are plenty. Cosmic horror, there are plenty. Science fiction, loads. Science fiction in 5e, yes, there are plenty. More Cthulhu stuff, oh please. Dark fantasy, by all means. Steampunk, yes. Dieselpunk, yes. There isn't a, there is no one company doing one thing and nobody else doing that thing. It just doesn't exist. But
Yeah.
again, I would like you to point at me if there is. Please let me know which one because I'd love to hear that. But I don't believe there is.
The other thing that came up was the posts that I sent you. I am not part of the. Like I said, I make a point of whenever I feel that there's somebody else on the market that's competing with me, even on a cursory level. I really hope for the best for them, but I don't generally let myself read their product because I don't want to be accused of ripping them off. And so I'm not part of the Everyday Heroes Facebook group.
Mhm.
I am not part of the Evil Genius group, and so uh, there were a couple posts, more than two or so, where it was accused that this article and these reports were a hit job, um, a leftist hit job on EGG and Dave Scott specifically, and there were posts of people who were saying that this was conspiratorial, of all things. And I thought that was bizarre. I thought that was bizarre and funny.
It was really strange, to hear somebody, to read somebody say, somebody called Chris as well, not you, another Chris. My theory, they were supposed to do the RPG game books for Rebel Moon. They were ready to push it out of the door. Netflix, at the last second, tried to pull out of the deal and didn't want to pay Evil Genius. So naturally, Evil Genius sued, as they should. This could be a smear campaign. And then somebody called James joins in the clever stream and said, my thoughts. Until I know more, my support for the game and company doesn't change. Netflix doesn't fucking need a smear campaign on anyone, especially somebody as small as Evil Genius Games, for goodness
Yeah,
sake.
yeah, that's a funny one.
As long, says Paul, as the quality of their products remain high, this article is meaningless to me. ENWorld is a biased source. Sounds like a leftist witch hunt. What the fucking hell? And Tommy replies, thank you, that's what I said too. Clever you. Personally, the struggles of strangers is not my business. Oh, what a fucking nice person you must be, Tommy. It must be so nice to not meet you. Oh, it is nice not to know you. As for the game company, I feel that I give them money. They give me products. Anything else is between the people who work there and the lawyers to figure out. And Paul replies, I agree. I'm assuming Evil Genius didn't kowtow enough to the progressive leftist, so this is an attempt to get them cancelled. I really read them like this. Okay, when I'm reading these Facebook comments, in my head, they sound that ridiculous and overactingly stupid. Seriously, what kind of shit person thinks that? I
Yeah,
don't get it.
it's weird that I guess because we're all socialists that we like there is a giant Facebook group of about 1 billion people, all the leftists of the world, and we go like, oh, and then there was like, we all just got together and said, you know what, we need to bring this company whose politics we nobody knew and still don't know, but we've got to take them down a notch because they were a little mean to a streaming service. I don't understand it, and I know it's going to say, oh, it's because of, you just assume, and this is kind of the assumption. This is when they make they jump to conclusions. Um, Zack Snyder, who wrote and directed Rebel Moon, is not a leftist. He is an Ayn Rand devotee, which means he's not a leftist because Ayn Rand absolutely cannot handle.
No.
She absolutely despises that sort of thing. So it's a safe assumption that even though he does not talk about his politics, but because he has always been a bit of a utilitarian, whatever the term is, that because of this, he is generally considered to be an ally of the right. And because he's an ally of the right, that the moment you kind of go against it, then so because that, it must be, and of course, because these are tech bros, and tech bros are associated with Elon Musk, well, then at that point, it must be a leftist conspiracy because it clearly people who the people who run EDG must be allies of the right because of these tenuous connections. And you think that that's like a very tenuous connection? Well, they've made stranger connections than that. But I was just like, I thought the idea of a California hit job, I was just like, when did California become a curse? Like, when did that become a pejorative? It's like, oh, they're Californians. I'm like,
Yeah,
is
that,
that?
that it doesn't work like that. But hey ho, look, whatever. We'll keep reporting and finding out what else people are saying about this topic. But for
Yep.
now, you know, there's not really a lot to say apart from who is this? Wait, sorry. Oi, sorry, humans. Chris is infecting me. I'm giving him my garlic smell, and he's infecting me with his cold over the waves. So anyway, we have a question, and actually a goddamn good one from our friend Jonathan Franklin 461 in YouTube, who said, "Very interesting show. Thank you for noticing, Jonathan. It's very kind of you, and you're absolutely right. I think empathy for NPCs is an interesting topic. You are completely right as well on that one. Undaunted does something similar by naming and depicting individuals who may perish. Interesting. I like the thought. Looking forward to Subterra and Seventh Citadel reviews. Coming very soon, my friends. Stay tuned. And since you have, that would be us, tabletop RPG crossover, how do you handle exploration in games without the players feeling like they are making a random choice or that the adventure is on rails? That's a very good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I could just, and I've had similar conversations with Frederick Wheeler from How to RPG, and we've had similar conversations, including things like, do as a does kind of GM present a combat encounter the players have no hope in winning? And I say absolutely. I think I've talked about this at this podcast. The fact that I generally will throw that to my characters at least once a season of a campaign. I run seasons and campaigns, and that they'll always fight something that they cannot defeat, and it's a real wake up call. Now, empathy for NPCs is one of the most difficult aspects. It is one of the few aspects. It's I have seen some of the most faithful and dependable role players lose empathy for NPCs. And unfortunately, it's difficult. And this is one of the reasons why
Yeah.
whenever people look at stuff like Walking Dead, or they look at the way people act on online RPGs, and how vicious and cruel that they can be, it comes down simply to there is a detachment people have when they look at their lack of empathy when it comes to things that don't exist, whether it be sprites on a computer screen or NPCs in a game, to the point where people kind of assume, oh, that's what that person is in real life. And I was just like, no, I think that the moment you put someone in a real life situation, there a lot more empathy comes in, which is the reason why whenever I look at something like Walking Dead and its nihilistic, very apathetic view of humanity, I think it's unrealistic. And this is one of the reasons why I've been very openly critical to the Battlestar Galactica TV show, the revival from the late mid 2000s, is that it was pushing the ideology that when you strip people of civilization, that they basically become very selfish people. And when you look at society in the history of the human race, that is not the case. People have a default desire to form communities, especially when they're on their own. And so when I look at players, I always get very frustrated when they don't act in basic empathy. Uh, and I have a lot of famous stories that I've going to talk about of players that it that that have no empathy. And for me, I as a GM and as a creator, but as a GM, my empathy to try to get my players to empathize, I have to take advantage of their greed. So, for example, if and this is going to sound so effed up, but if there's a child that's being chased by a dragon,
Mhm.
the players will not feel overly obligated to save that child. If it's a damsel, and I have a group of gendered men, which is not uncommon for my group, that's also something that we're going to end up saying, like, well, maybe we'll save her, but most of these guys are not in it for the romance. If, however, it is a wagon of magic items that's being chased by that dragon, you can absolutely guarantee that the players will jump in to rescue. And this has been a situation where I've been in situations where the players have gone into and met royalty, and oftentimes when players have hit royalty, there's always this caveat where the GM, as the king or queen, or the general royal, you cannot give them the brass ring, because there's like, you can't give the players everything that they could possibly hope for. They'll be way too powerful. And so there's always a level of antagonism between some type of person with power and then the player characters. So in a situation where the players went to meet this one monarch, he was just like, well, we're not a rich kingdom, but if you want, I'll give you estates, I'll give you a manor, you can have horses. We don't really have any magic, but you can everything that we have is yours. And the players are like, well, we're going to absolutely fight to death to keep you guys alive because of your generosity. Like the basic human empathy so often seems lacking. And so to get players to like and want to protect somebody, an NPC, it's sometimes difficult without tapping in their more selfish nature. And it's something that is always something that bothered me, where if the players are trying to defend a village, that village has to be supremely altruistic towards a group of strangers they haven't met, for that group of strangers to be empathetic to them. They couldn't I've seen unbelievable amounts of callousness within players, um, that feel like, literally, I've had players that have accidentally decimated people, and they get upset, rightfully so. And then getting players to apologize is one of the most difficult things I have ever done, is to get them to admit when they're wrong.
I wonder if this is something to do with differences in player culture, because that's not at all how I perceive it from here.
Oh, I got to move to Spain and run a game.
It's, well, not just Spain, but also the UK. And I'm going to speak for the experience of me and my groups, not general, because I don't know enough. I haven't played with that many people to know this. But the NPCs that we have felt more empathetic with have been the ones that were very fleshed out. To give you an example, when we played the Rise of the Room Lords, there was a character there. I think she was called Sakiko or Akiko, something like that. I can't remember exactly. But we absolutely loved her. We really liked the inn that she was running and how she joined us to go into some adventuring. We loved the town where the whole adventure begins and is attacked by goblins. We absolutely loved them. And we felt like they were part of us.
Mm.
And I think that that was probably to do with the way that the GM managed to describe the whole situation and the whole scenario to help us connect. When I was recently playing the recent Dragonlance campaign, there is a character that is a paladin wannabe, is a knight of Solamia wannabe. He's training to become one. And in the first act, his mentor disappears. She is engulfed in flames or whatever and disappears in the middle of a battle. And
That whole thing.
yes,
Man, if I had a dime
and the
for each time.
characters get the message of go into my room, take this chest that's under my bed, and give it to this knight. You know, and when the characters give this wannabe knight the chest, is a whole full Solamia armor. So that was basically his mentor saying, "Yes, you're ready to become a knight. You're worthy." The way that I managed to portray that literally brought a lump to the throat of two of my friends. It was very emotive. It was very tender, and it was very emotional. And they absolutely loved and empathized with that character. They really wanted to protect them and go with that character and do everything with him. But I reckon that was because I managed to flesh out the situation very well. So without that, I don't know how you can build empathy. And I don't think greed builds empathy. Greed builds greed. But I
Oh
wouldn't call
yeah.
that empathy.
Yeah, like I said, for me, it's always been a kind of fight to try to find ways. And part of it is obviously people are going to say, and unfortunately, I've had conversations to this, and I've seen comments of people have said your players seem like sociopaths, and I go, unfortunately, I play with a lot of number of people, and I wish it wasn't a staple. And I hate to say it, but um, the players that seem to hang around are the ones that do it for the greed. I have a lot of players that have expressed their empathy, but I generally have trouble trying to kind of snag them and keep them into the group. Um, so it can get very very tricky. And I've mentioned my Alien game,
Mhm.
which I think I've talked about, which I had players interview for a whole session. They interviewed like 60 people, picked the 30 they liked, and I didn't start killing them off until for a full year. And then when I started doing it, they started to get upset by the fact that I was killing them off. And I've done the same thing, but because I generally will have quite a few NPCs. I There was I wouldn't say people will call this a pet NPC, but I had a couple NPCs that were filling up a smaller group. We ended up getting additional players, so the importance of these NPCs started to fall to the wayside. One of them was about to be the love interest for a one player, but that player left the group, so that person kind of that NPC kind of wandered until they became a love interest for another player, and it was a very interesting, complex relationship. And when we created a crisis where that person seemingly got killed, we were able to create proper emotion. It's easy to get angry, um, and it's easy to become that greed, that happiness. Feeling sadness has been a very difficult emotion to try to convey in players that are
Hmm.
generally not used to experiencing those within a game format. Um, Now, the second point was since you have tabletop RPG crossovers, how do you handle exploration games without the players feeling like they're making a random choice or that the adventure is on rails? Uh, I have I have been attacked a lot in the long time ago when I was making comments about the term of railroading, and when I ever talk to GMs, they generally understand my situation. Players like to think they have complete freedom, and GMs are effectively magicians trying to lie to their players to think that they have choice. This has been the dance between the game masters and the players, with the players believing they have free will and the GMs giving them the illusion of free will. And this is generally conveyed in the two ideas which I make relating to video games. One is the Skyrim model, the second is the Mass Effect model. Now, the Skyrim model is what I call the shallow ocean. You can go anywhere and do anything, but there's no depth. There's very little depth. There's very like the NPCs are all hollow. They're all flat. There isn't much. There's a lot to do, but eventually it's kind of like Fallout. You do a bunch of things, go a bunch of things, and then when you kind of get bored, you finish the game. But when you look at something like Mass Effect, it has these fully fleshed out characters, but there aren't very many of them. You can't go everywhere. In fact, you probably only have about half a dozen choices, and but every area is heavily fleshed out. You can't just walk to a random person and start a relationship with them because there's only a few characters you can interact with. But people praise the storylines of these games. Uh, so with players, the secret if you are a GM and you want to tell a specific story and you want players to get to a certain point, I consider this as something I've been thinking about doing in my own video series about how to run certain games. And the first thing is that write your next sessions in pencil, metaphorically. Be prepared to erase things. Be prepared to erase where you want them to go. That's the first thing. Don't because if you have to shove them into a certain direction, you are railroading them. Write it in pencil. So be open to changing things, which I do a lot. The second is communication. Talk to your players and find out why they're in your session. What are they there for? And the easiest way for me to deal with this is to simply lay down some ground rules. And I think that it's nothing wrong with a GM to say this is the game we're running. Like, and so as a result, we have a communication, and it's not like I'm bringing my chaotic evil character in your game, and you say, well, I have four paladins, so I'm pretty sure your character won't be allowed in this group. And like, well, you'll figure it out. Like, no, that's not going to be allowed, right? And like, whenever I have a session for a game that I'm running, I'm saying I have a simple rule: you guys are heroes, you are the good guys, so you need to understand at the end of the day that this is a story based campaign. That story is going to be focused around you characters doing the right thing. This is not a loot shoot game where all it matters is your personal power. If you have a problem with that, that's fine. You don't have to be a part of this group. But nothing is more chaotic than five psychopaths that are looking for their own personal glory because they will go off and do random things. And there are players that swear how much they enjoy it. But if you're a GM, because you don't railroad someone unless you have a destination, and that destination implies a plot. If you don't care where they go, then you're not railroading them. But if you have an idea where you want them to go, that means you have a story. And if you have a story, make sure you're communicating with your players that that's your intent. Because nothing's more frustrating with is a GM and a group of players that are not communicating, and as a result, you get frustrations on both sides.
I agree with that, and I'm going to side with the railroading bit. I don't believe in sandboxing. I'm sorry. I know that you can. but eventually it has to be tamed. Otherwise, the more sandbox it is, the less story that you can put in it, or at least cohesive story arc. You can put an awful lot of small stories. You can get this massive world, as what you say. It has no depth to it, where you can go to this house and then do this little task for this family that live there, and you have to clean some rats, and then you go to another place where you have to, fell some trees or whatever, what have you. But that doesn't give a long story, a cohesive story arc. What games is doing that to me currently, and I am giving up on it, and people are gonna hate me for that. The Tears of the Wild Zelda game.
Oh
I know it's a computer game, but I'm giving up on
no,
that
it's,
game.
yeah, yeah.
It's beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. But the main story is so lost in the vastness of the world that I cannot really advance quickly enough to keep myself interested in what Link is meant to do. So if you make a role playing game that large, then that is also going to happen. Railroading has to happen at some point. You have to nudge your player into the direction where you need them to go in order for the adventure to continue. And as you said, if the players are not cooperating, then you're just going to end up incredibly frustrated. There are several ways that I do to kind of give this idea, this impression of agency, and is that when I do a campaign, I make sure I have some milestones, whether they are locations or events that have to happen anywhere. It doesn't matter where they are. So you can have 10 different locations within a map, and at least two or three of them are going to be compulsory, that will have some sort of consequence that will drive the story forward. And the players have no agency as to when they're going to find those things. It may take a little bit longer, it may take a little bit shorter, depending on how boring they're finding everything else that they have to do. But they don't have any agency as to when that happens. I decide when they find these events or when they find these places. That way, they have this notion of openness, but in reality, the choices are being curtailed. Whether you can do them well or not, that's entirely up to you. But that's how I do my railroading. That's how I hide
Well,
it.
I think the secret is to have the MacGuffin, whether it be a ring, whether it be a destination, an act of vengeance. You have to get to this location, or you have to find these items. I've always had an overarching point. If you don't give players a point, they won't. Like I said, that's the thing about people. Well, you're railroading. It's like, well, here's the thing. If you see the destination, if you're on a flat plane and you see a railroad, you see a walking path and a road, and they're all going off in different directions, and you see off in the distance the city where you have to get to, you're going to walk to that. And if the railroad takes you there, that's the direction you go. Players aren't going to take, well, I want to take the road. And someone's like, well, that road's going west. The city is north. The railroad is north. And some players have been like, well, it's clearly he wants us to go to the city because I can see the railroad. It's very clearly we're being railroaded to the city. And the players are like, yeah, but that's where we have to go. That's the destination.
Mm-hmm.
We've been given our quest. The quest is that city. And so that comes in communication when you have a disruptive player that's like, well, I don't want to go to the city. I go, well, then why are you in this group? You can go off and do that. We're going off to do this. And I've had situations in the dark days of my gaming life when I was much, much younger, where there was such division within the group, they would separate, and you'd have a group of people that would continue the quest, and a group of people that would refuse it because their insistence on not being railroaded, and they would just rather just do something else. And as a GM, I would be like, "Why are you here?"
Hmm.
And that's partly my failure as a GM. So if you get 5 players together and the players can say, we don't want a story, we just want to go hit stuff and get gold, and then the GM's like, okay, fine. But for me, my last 20 years of my gaming as a GM, the players all said they came to my session because they wanted. But there was one player that didn't. He always joined up with the group, but he was the person that was the biggest shit disturber. He was the person that would do things, like I said, who lacked basic human empathy, who did things by reflex, assuming that he would simply survive because he was a player. And then it was up to the other players to say, "What are you doing?" Like we're not like the last time him and I had a game together, an army came in, and this army was subverting the population of this town. Now, it should be noted, he was a pretty high level character, and his opinion was, I'm just going to step up and kill the general. And I'm like, dude, this isn't like the Chitauri from Avengers. This isn't the Borg. If you kill the head of the snake, it doesn't die. This is an army. If you kill the general, they're all just going to kill you. And you have to know that if you do that, they're going to sack the town and kill everybody. But he was so dead set that he was about to walk over, and the players had to physically restrain this other player by saying, "You're not going to kill everybody in this town, including us, because you think that if you see bad, you have to stop it. You're not this singular force." And he was trying to make a case saying he was, until players basically said, like, "You're not, because you're basically going to TPK this whole group on your stupidity."
Mm-hmm.
And the players in game stopped that other player from acting up. And he ended up being someone that I was telling other players, like, you have to kind of keep this guy in check. If you let him monopolize the group, he will run off the rails, and you'll never get to that town. Because if you're a group that wants to get to a town, and that's what happened with one of my games, because he was surrounded by players, and the players were very, I would say, very timid, and so he, through force of will, kept on kind of forcing his decision, and the players would be like, "Well, like, we can't get to the town." I go, "Well, you can't get to the town because you keep on going off and
Yes.
following this
Yeah,
guy
I can see what you mean.
instead of telling him where you're supposed to go. You know that the destination's the town. Why do you keep on following somebody going west?"
Mm.
And that's the biggest thing when you deal with it. You have to is communication and understanding. And also, there's this old belief system back, this is coming from the 80s and 90s, of a conflict, a war between the GM and the players. They were antagonists. And it wasn't until, I think, in the mid 2000s when I realized that is one of the most unhealthy relationships out there, is to create an antagonistic relationship between the games master and their players.
Mm. Well, I hope that we have somehow somewhat answered that question as to how to manage that feeling of randomness and
Yes,
keeping
thank
things
you
on
for this
rail.
one.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much indeed. And that's all we have for time for tonight, because even though we're not doing the reviews, we're still taking an hour of recording, which is quite amazing. So, humans, do keep sending us your questions, whether you watch this on YouTube or anywhere at all. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, please do email us at podcast@gmsmagazine.com. Find me on Twitter, where I am at GMS Magazine. Well, there are plenty of links down there in the show notes, so you will know where I am.
And this is Chris from DS.
And you've muted yourself.
I muted myself halfway. I'm not sure why I did that. You find me on DSX Mac and on all social medias. And of course, if you're interested in gluten-free crackers, find me in Tavern Snaps.
Good. Talk to you very soon with some reviews. Bye.